I have to say goodbye, remember me. Don't let it make you cry, for even if I'm far away, I hold you in my heart. I sing a secret song to you each night we are apart. Remember me, though I have to travel far, remember me. Each time you hear a sad guitar, know that I am with you the only way that I can be, until you're in my arms again. Remember me. Je veux te voir, mon ami, ne m'oublie pas.
Welcome, friends and allies, to what unfortunately Michael Jones, Pastoral Administrator at Connection 6-8 United Church of Christ, and its outreach for State Pride Faith Network, along with my co-host, friend, and ally, Reverend Katie Penning. Today, we will journey together to remember and celebrate the lives of those we lost the last 12 months. We hope and long for the day when a vigil will no longer be needed to mourn the violent loss of many of our transgender siblings. Thank you for taking the time to commit to this solemn ceremony and joining us in committing to making the world a better place as we remember those we have lost this year. As you well know, 2020 has been, for the most part, a very, very painful year for everyone. Amid a global pandemic, epic unemployment, and a series of state-sanctioned murders of Black people. Let us take a moment to remember another year of the horrific violence against the transgender community. In 2020, at least 350 transgender or gender non-conforming people were murdered. In the US, at least 28 lives are reported murdered by Trans Murder Monitoring Project and published by Transgender Europe. We say at least because too often these stories go unreported or misreported. 98% of those killed globally were trans women. The TMMP project documented 28 transgender murders in the US. However, Trans Lives Matters documents 53 transgender and gender diverse persons lost in 2020. Trans Lives Matters additionally documents trans suicides related to bullying, medical related deaths, and those not categorized. The report includes 3 additional losses due to violence, 8 suicides, 1 in correctional custody, 4 medical related deaths, 3 of which were COVID-19, and 9 deaths that were uncategorized. This is an additional 25 transgender and gender diverse lives, making the total 381 transgender and gender diverse lives lost forever if we combine the 2 reports.
The statistical data from both reporting sources continue to shed light on the solemn facts that not only does America and the world have an ongoing epidemic of anti-trans violence with transgender and gender diverse individuals continuing to lose their lives in violent incidents at alarming rates year after year, but that transgender people of color, particularly Black and Latinx trans women, are disproportionately impacted, especially in America, a fact that many Black trans advocates have highlighted. The Human Rights Campaign issued a statement saying that 2020 in the United States has seen the highest number of fatal deaths of transgender or gender nonconforming people since 2017, when 31 were violently killed. That number was exceeded by 22 this year, and this is unacceptable. HRC did note that the number of violent deaths may be increasing not only because of an escalating amount of violence, but also potentially because more instances of violence are being reported by advocates, the media, and law enforcement. Either way, we must do better as a nation and as a world. We must demand better. We must live the example of love and compassion because every life is a precious gift and has value. We must not accept that transgender and gender diverse life was taken from us approximately every 9 days. We must not accept the somber fact that 60% of the incidents taking these precious lives involve gun violence, as has been the case since 2013. We must take action and demand better for our transgender siblings.
We gather today to remember the people, our friends and family members, that were violently taken from us due to hate, bias, and misunderstanding. We gather here today to also spread awareness, to demand action, and to provide support and hope.
Let us pray.
Eternal Spirit, grant us the love, courage, tenacity, and will to continue to make a difference in a world that includes such violence, so often aimed at minority communities.
Inspire us to challenge and stand strong against the forces that allow the needless harm and violence to continue. Prejudice, unjust laws, repression, stigma, and fear.
Into your care, we trust and lift up the hundreds of souls who have been tortured and murdered.
We lift up to you our dreams of a world where all are cared for.
Our dreams of wholeness.
Our dreams of a world where all are accepted and respected.
A dream we know you share.
Amen. We've introduced some of the sobering facts of 2020 that bring us here today. But before we go any further, let us look at the history of TDoR.
In cities and towns around the world, the LGBTQ+ community comes together with allies and friends, marking the 22nd annual Transgender Day of Remembrance, now accompanied by Trans Awareness Week and Trans Awareness Month. Transgender Day of Remembrance, lovingly known as TDoR, is a yearly commemoration of those who have lost their lives to anti-transgender violence.
Each TDoR observance is different, representing the uniqueness of the local transgender communities that organize them. Some are very formal, others more folksy. Some feel like a church service, while others are more like a civil rights rally. However, almost all share one element in common: a reading of the names of people murdered over the last 12 months, simply because they were transgender or someone believed them to be. TDoR is a solemn event.
Some have criticized the Transgender Day of Remembrance for being too dark, too gloomy, or too morbid. We've seen days of action and weeks of awareness spring up around the world, in part to help offset this darkness. A move I wholeheartedly support. The trans community can use all the awareness and all the support it can muster to help bring about true equality. Just as the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall refuses to allow us to remember the Vietnam War without remembering the people who gave their lives to see that war through, the Transgender Day of Remembrance and its list of names serve the important purpose of giving name to those whom we have lost and advocate for in the battle for LGBT equality. It reminds us how much is at stake. It shocks us out of our day-to-day detachment that our privilege grants us. It refuses to allow us to go about our advocacy and activism as if it were just a job or hobby. It makes us remember the precious lives lost and why we must continue to fight for equality for all people, especially our transgender siblings. So as you can see, the list of names is more than just a list of names. And if it causes us to shed a tear or two, so much the better. Frankly, I think we could use a few more of those too. Tears show our humanness and our compassion. Tears show we remember, and tears motivate us to do more to right the injustices of the world.
Most trace the beginning of the Transgender Day of Remembrance back to the night in late November 1998. The murder of Rita Hester on November 28th of that year in Allston, Massachusetts, that shook the local community. The resulting walk through the streets and candlelight vigil outside her apartment are considered the inspiration for what has become an international act of remembrance for those who were killed in acts of transgender violence. The following year, a candlelight vigil was held in San Francisco, and every year the remembrance has grown from very local beginnings to an international audience. Gwendolyn Ann Smith, the organizer of that first walk and vigil, later explained, quote, Transgender Day of Remembrance seeks to highlight the losses we face due to anti-transgender bigotry and violence. I am no stranger to the need to fight for our rights, and the right to simply exist is first and foremost. With so many seeking to erase transgender people, sometimes in the most brutal ways possible, it is vitally important that those we lose are remembered and that we continue to fight for justice.
It is important to know that not everyone remembered self-identified as transgender, though each was a victim of violence based on bias against transgender and gender variant people. Some are friends, lovers, and allies who were killed while they were with someone who was transgender. Others may not have identified as such, but were perceived to be somehow gender variant by their attackers. The Transgender Day of Remembrance is more than just a memorial. It raises public awareness of the hatred and violence against those in our transgender community, which often the media suppresses. It publicly mourns and honors the lives of those who might otherwise be forgotten, giving their silence, lives new voice. It is an opportunity to meet hatred and indifference with love and respect. Day of Remembrance does just that. It remembers the forgotten who were also children, parents, lovers, and friends, who were part all of our communities. Day of Remembrance offers us all an opportunity to stand together and say, no more.
The first public TDoR observance in Hagerstown was in 2003, when Terry Lee Bell who felt that every town should have an event making the public aware of trans lives being lost for no good reason, founded the Hagerstown TG's support group in Hagerstown TDoR Vigil. That first vigil occurred on the public square in downtown Hagerstown with about 15 people in attendance, and has remained there since, except for this year, which is a virtual event, only due to the pandemic. Terry Lee ensured a public vigil was held every year through 2012, when she moved out of the country and passed the reins to John Lustian. John organized the vigil for the years 2013 and 2014 before moving to DC. In 2015, Veritas UCC, now Connection 68 UCC, began organizing this important event, which continues to this day. Coordination with the mayor's office to issue a city proclamation began that year, and I am proud to say this has continued each year since, with Mayors Geisberts, Mayor Brucci, and now Mayor Keller will continue this tradition this coming year. This year's city proclamation was issued on November 17th by outgoing Mayor Robert Brucci. Hear now the Hagerstown City Proclamation for Transgender Day of Remembrance.
Whereas Transgender Day of Remembrance, TDoR, was started in 1999 by transgender advocate Gwendolyn Ann Smith as a vigil to honor the memory of Rita Hester, a transgender woman who was brutally stabbed at least 20 times in her apartment in 1998 in Austin, Massachusetts. Her murder remains unsolved to this day, but not unheralded. The vigil began an important tradition that has become the annual Transgender Day of Remembrance, now an international event. And
whereas TDoR, which is marked with solemn ceremonies on November 20th, has a reporting period between October 1st and September 30th. This year, there were at least 350 trans and gender diverse people reported murdered worldwide, 98% of which were trans women, some as young as 15 years of age. And
whereas in the United States, 51 transgender or gender diverse lives were reported lost this year, at least 30 of whom were violently murdered. 79% of reported victims in the United States were trans women of color. And
whereas year after year, trans and gender diverse persons continue to lose their lives in violent incidents at alarming rates, 2020 has seen the most recorded fatal deaths in a 12-month period since 2018. Transgender Day of Remembrance is an opportunity to remember our trans and gender diverse siblings who have been murdered as a result of hate, and would most likely otherwise be forgotten, while raising awareness, providing support, and extending hope. And
whereas the city of Hagerstown is fully committed to the safety, well-being, and health of all citizens and of all people, the commemoration of Transgender Day of Remembrance is an expression of this commitment and a reminder that trans and gender diverse people are our sons, daughters, parents, friends, and family.
now therefore be it resolved with the support of the City Council, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby proclaim November 20th, 2020 as Transgender Day of Remembrance in Hagerstown, and encourage all citizens to work towards ending all forms of violence against others. Signed this 17th day of November 2020, Mayor Robert E. Brucci II for the City of Hagerstown.
Remember me whenever you're blue. Remember me when there's no one holding you. Anytime you feel like you can't make it through, remember me and I will be with you. Remember me whenever you're afraid, and when you lose your dreams along the way. Anytime you feel like you can't make it through, remember me and I will be with you. Every night and every day, I'll be by your side. Just reach out and take my hand. I will be your guide. And anytime you feel like you can't make it through, remember me and I will be with you. Every night and every day, I'll be by your side. Just reach out and take my hand. I will be your guide. And anytime you feel like you can't make it through, remember me and I will be with you. Remember me whenever you're afraid. Remember me if there's someone in my place. Anytime you feel like you can't make it through, remember me and I will be with you.
In this year filled with heartache and grief, we acknowledge and honor the at least 350 trans and gender diverse people who have been murdered. This represents a significant increase from last year. These tragic facts remind us of the ways in which carrying multiple marginalized identities puts people's lives at further risk. These risks are compounded by profound disparities in access to healthcare, job protections, and basic economic supports like living wages and affordable housing. For trans people of color, and especially trans women of color, the dangers presented by life in a pandemic are tremendous. We know that what we are seeing in these disparities and instances of trans antagonistic violence is white supremacy, patriarchy, and transphobia operating in our society. Violence and compound oppressions are taking the lives of beautiful loved ones from their families and their communities. I pray that these senseless acts of violence end, and I know that the end will only come if we all continue to work for justice and equity by dismantling these interlocking systems of oppression.
The organizing work of trans and non-binary leaders and trans leaders of color this year has been inspiring. The power and resilience of these communities in the face of near constant attacks is humbling. Their organizing has been essential to pushing back against the fascism and dehumanization that has been growing steadily in this country. Our prayer on this Transgender Day of Remembrance is for the senseless acts of trans antagonistic violence to end, and that we may all take on the work to disrupt the systems and cultures that perpetuate this violence.
As such harm continues to impact transgender and non-binary people, we are also mindful of their resilience and victories for trans rights. In 2020, Sarah McBride became the first transgender candidate ever elected to state senate. Transgender activist Amy Stevens, along with other LGBT litigants, won the SCOTUS ruling that the 1964 Civil Rights Act protecting gay, lesbian, and transgender employees from discrimination based on sex. Transgender and non-binary people everywhere are working for justice in many ways. They are surviving in a world often not built for their survival. They are supporting each other and working daily for a world where trans people are celebrated and normalized. They are simply existing too. Whether or not they decide to be openly transgender or non-binary, and that is a powerful act of resilience. May we celebrate them too, as we grieve the loss of these at least 350 lives. This is why we must remain committed to doing the work to dismantle a culture of white supremacy, patriarchy, and transphobia in ourselves, in our communities, and for those of us of faith, in our faith at large.
Today, I also offer a prayer of deep gratitude for the trans and non-binary leaders of our faith, leading from the liberating, life-giving truth at the heart of our theologies. Trans and non-binary leaders bring so much to our faith, and they do so often at a tremendous cost to their own spirits as they face transphobia, dismissal, and disrespect within their own communities. As a person of faith, I acknowledge that much of this violence has been fueled by transphobia and homophobia, wrongfully expressed in the name of God. It is imperative that people of faith must take a profound and important step for every faith community to join in a resounding chorus that condemns all forms of violence against all people who are differently gendered. It is this truth that calls us, especially those of us who are cisgender and who are white, to live more fully into the inclusive and liberatory spirit of our theology and nurture communities and a society where all transgender people and everyone of non-binary identity experiences solidarity, solace, and safety. May we each take up this call in our hearts and in our communities so that we can all build a future where all people can thrive. As people of faith, There is more work to do for us to be the community that trans and non-binary people of faith deserve and need. So let us lean into trans resilience and support its blossoming. In mourning, let us work to end the white supremacy, trans antagonism, and other forms of oppression that are literally killing Black and Latinx trans people. As people of faith, let us celebrate the inherent worth of and dignity of trans people by remembering those we've lost and honoring those living among us, charging us to love better, work harder, and be more equitable toward all people, especially those who are transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, and other non-cisgender identities.
Transgender Day of Remembrance is an opportunity for faith communities to proclaim again the good news of each person's truest identity as children of God, and that God calls each of us to live out our lives in the truest, most authentic way. We are likewise reminded of the ways in which we fall short of God's call, allowing prejudice, lack of understanding, and fear to get the best of us, resulting in injustice and oppression, bigotry and hatred, which can result in violence and even death.
And it isn't just in our faith communities that transgender people face discrimination. Trans people are susceptible to being targeted while walking down the street, attending school, catching a bus, shopping, or even obtaining employment, just to name a few examples, just due to their gender identity and presentation, and far too often additionally because of their race. Hate violence comes in the form of disapproving stares, negative comments, jokes and slurs, and harassment at school by students, teachers, administrators, and at work by coworkers and superiors. Trans people of color are twice as likely to be targeted or killed due to their race and gender identity and presentation. These acts lead to further aggression of violence. It even condones violence that is perpetuated by the system, which includes courts, law enforcement, and prison workers. Trans people are profiled just walking down the street and then subjected to extra scrutiny and attention that doesn't protect them, but makes them even more vulnerable and likely to become incarcerated and a part of a system in which they suffer even more abuse. Perpetuating hate and violence condones domestic violence by their partners once others find out that they are dating a trans person. It condones mistreatment in schools, communities, work, and in other places. Hate and violence not only lead to abuse and murder, but sometimes to suicide. According to the national survey, Injustice at Every Turn, nearly half, or 41%, of trans people have attempted suicide, which is 25% more than the national average. The life of a trans or gender diverse person isn't easy. So let's stop acting like being transgender or lesbian or gay or bisexual is a choice. If it was a choice, an easier path would be chosen. So may we begin respecting one another with love and compassion, without exception.
So maybe all transgender people are really vampires. I of course don't mean the ones that sparkle in daylight, nor the ones who crave a fair maiden's neck. After all, most trans people can't even walk home without the uncertainty of how their own blood might puddle across the pavement. But I of course don't mean the ones in Transylvanian castles either, because even though I am a queen, even though I spit shine my wounds like my grandma's good silver, I admit, I thought the existence of a Transylvania meant a sanctuary for the wretched could exist, but expecting safety is more fiction than monster. I've always been a pair of thirsty things. When was the last time you saw a face like mine without the glow of a mob's torch, a pitchfork's thrust? In times of crisis, is it not my head they swing on a stick? Instead of vampires, we cannot see our own reflections. Maybe that means whatever stares back at me in mirrors is made of smoke and myth. Maybe I was born wombless and wounded, born bloodthirsty for whatever would make me more woman, including the slice and pull of my own flesh, for my own blood to crawl to its own surface. Maybe I was born dead, or even worse, undead. An undying thing refusing to rot, even when this world wants me burned, for a body so foreign, not even I recognize it some mornings. Am I not alive despite this fear of dying? Is it too early to call the ACLU, to write the obituary, the ghost story, the one about the vampire who predicted her own death? Or maybe I've just run out of metaphors. Maybe harpy, witch, anything the evening news will rename demented, disposable, so deserving of each puncture hole it collected, and therefore synonymous with transgender. I'm so tired of comparing myself to ghosts to prove that I too deserve an average lifespan over 32. If I'm so abnormal, then maybe I too can be the statistical anomaly. Maybe I've never been certain about anything except uncertainty. That looming anxiety in my gut that tells me how I inherited all my grief, how I inherited the skulls of every queen before me that I now wear like crowns, and what radiance it is to sparkle in daylight, to command everyone's attention, especially those who make a bullseye out of my beauty that will never be woman enough for anyone's sympathy. Maybe transgender people really are all vampires. Maybe my reflection belongs to everyone but me. And maybe the next time I leave home, I won't come back.
Wow, just wow. Chrysanthemum Tran leaves one speechless from the elegance and passion she recites her poetry, with detailing the daily concerns and fears of being trans. Things that most of us take for granted are met with uncertainty and fear in the life of a trans or gender diverse person. This must change. This is why we remember and gather today.
In this nation and world where there are many strides being made for the civil and human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, many struggles are also remain. In the midst of such tragedy, it is more important than ever to lift up the Transgender Day of Remembrance, to remember the transgender siblings we have lost, but also to embrace our transgender siblings who yet struggle to be themselves. This is how we truly remember, by taking action today and every day.
As we prepare to shift our hearts and minds to remembering our dead, the precious lives lost this year, with the reading of the names, we'd like to first read a poem written by the Hagerstown TDoR founder, Terry Lee, who read this at a vigil years ago and has given permission to read it today. I'd asked her to record herself reading it, but she says she cannot make a thorough reading of it without crying. So cry as you need, and know that we are here giving you a virtual hug as we shed tears with you. The poem is entitled, I Didn't Know Her.
I didn't know her. She was found in the river, disposed of like useless trash, covered with mud and debris. I didn't know her, but she could have been me. Those who found her didn't know her either. She had painted nails and obvious breasts. Police said she was murdered, stab wounds in the chest. Once the mud was cleared away, it was discovered she was a he. I didn't know her, but she could have been me. When will we learn? When will we understand? We are humans too, hand in hand. When will we learn? When will we understand? Our lives are important. Our lives could be grand. I didn't know her, and her life ended so young. What will it take to turn that around? How many more must die from hate before society learns to appreciate? I didn't know her, but she could have been me.
Please join us in a moment of silence as we remember all 350 known names murdered this year worldwide, as we echo silently within our hearts and mind the loving mantra, "We remembered you." Or you may prefer to echo it aloud. That is fine too. We remember you. We now will remember the 53 lives lost here in America, naming each one individually. Repeat their name with us if you like, as you remember. It is important to note that the list of names are those lost here in America, murdered in our own country, with 14 of the names being murder victims from the Mid-Atlantic region, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Let us remember them.
Arian Burnett, shot.
Aja Raquel Roan Spears, Rocky Roan, stabbed.
Alex McCrae, suicide.
Alice Carter, baby Alice, cause of death not reported.
Angel Rose Garcia, cause of death not reported.
Angela Martinez Gomez, COVID-19.
Ashley Moore, not reported.
Brayla Stone, shot.
Bree Black, shot.
Brian Powers, Eagle, shot.
Brianna B.B. Hill, shot.
Camila Maria Concepcion, suicide.
Christine Zephyr, not reported.
Corbin Ray Bach, suicide.
Daphne Dorman, suicide.
Dominique Remy Fells, stabbed and dismembered.
Drea McCarty, not reported.
Dustin Parker, shot.
Eli Che, drowned.
Emerald Kelliher, suicide.
Emily Nicole Brown, suicide.
Gia Valentina Romado Rodriguez, medical.
Helly J. O'Regan, stabbed.
Henrietta Robinson, COVID-19.
Isabella Mia Lofton, cause unknown.
Janelle Ariana Briscoe, suicide.
Jane Thompson, shot.
Johanna Metzger, stabbed.
John Scott DeVore, Scotland Kelly DeVore, murdered.
Key Sam, shot.
Leah Rayshawn Day, died in custody.
Lexi Ebony Sutton, stabbed.
Lorena Borjas, COVID-19.
Marilyn Monroe Cazares, stabbed and burned.
Mercy Mack, shot.
Mia Green, shot.
Mia Penny, shot.
Monica Diamond, shot.
Name unknown, not reported.
Nikki Kuhnhausen, murdered.
Nina Pop, stabbed.
Oliver Sasser, not listed.
Kaisha Hardy, shot.
Rhea Milton, shot.
Rukia Isis Bamer, suicide.
Selena Reyes Hernandez, shot.
Shockey Peters, shot.
Shelley Lynn Rose, suicide.
Summer Taylor, run over.
Tatiana Hall, murder.
Tiffany Harris, TDoR H. Ova, stabbed.
Tony McDade, shot.
Yahira Nesby, shot.
We have spoken their names in commemoration of their lives and the gift that they were to the world. We now celebrate their lives with the ringing of the bells, an age-old tradition that in the past called attention to the fact that a soul was passing into the next world, and asked your prayers for that soul to have safe passing. Offer up your prayers for the precious souls just named, and for the other 331 souls worldwide that we did not name. Let us celebrate their lives.
Save me a moment in your mind, just a pause, then let it end. I've seen the highway 1,000 times, just to be with you again.
to sleep, then release me in your dreams. Stumble down mountains rough and steep, just to drink from unknown streams. Remember me, even when we are apart and I'm not there. Remember me, if you have time to spare. Remember me. I'm a ghost inside your head. Don't be afraid to set me free. That doesn't mean our line's gone dead, but now the line you'll clearly see. Remember me, even when we are apart and I'm not there. Remember me, if you have time to spare. Remember me. I've seen the future in your eyes and known the roots under your tree. Though with our past our treasure lies, when you can remember me.
Let us pray. O holy flame, spark of all creation, you who we greet as the great flame in our lives, providing shining light for our vision and soothing warmth for our hearts, help us be attentive witnesses today to the extraordinary wonder that walks among us daily in grace.
As we remember the violence that has destroyed so many lives, of people who you call beloved, grant us the strength and resolve to look upon this great pain in reverence and sobriety without turning away or denying the reality of this terror.
So to kindle within us power to not let pain deter us from struggling onward in justice and in peace, to make the present a different story.
As the fires of experience burn scorching hot in the life of every trans person, grant that these fires may burst forth into a world eager for the warmth of the truth of abundant trans life and thriving.
Forge from this fire a new world, one filled with justice and with peace, together, one blessed by strength and tenderness, together, one called to challenge and to soothe, together, one able to strain and to heal, together, and one that is grieving and rejoicing, together. Amen.
Hi, this is Lieutenant Fetchy with the Hagerstown City Police Department. We here at HPD just want to take a moment and reflect on the Transgender Day of Remembrance, where we think about those who have lost their lives and those who have been affected by violence and bullying. We here at the Hagerstown City Police Department, we fully stand behind our LGBTQ community and the safety of all of those in the Hagerstown community at large. We remember.
We have remembered, raised awareness, told our stories, and expressed our love and respect in the face of so much indifference and hatred. Let the guiding principles behind the Transgender Day of Remembrance be instructive principles for every day of your life journey.
Transgender lives are affirmed as valuable.
It is up to us to remember, since their killers, law enforcement, the media, and so many others often seek to erase their existence.
We can make a difference by being visible, speaking out, educating and organizing around anti-transgender violence, and that can affect change and stop the flood of violence against transgender and gender nonconforming individuals.
Most importantly, remember that time and time again, experience and research show that when trans people experience support, connection, and validation from each other, from their lesbian and gay siblings, and from CIS gender people, they are more likely to survive and thrive.
Our time together, friends, comes to an end, but our time of remembrance and action only begins as we return to the schedules of our daily lives. Into a world that isn't always accepting and loving, may we remember and act accordingly so that we make a positive difference in the world.
Thank you for taking the time to join us as we remember.